Hello, friends. Thanks for stopping by. For the last several weeks on Sunday mornings, I've been preaching through the book of First Peter here at Calvary Baptist Church. And I'm going to be preaching through First Peter for the next several weeks as well. What I wanted to do is over the next little while, every day, I want to spend a little bit of time with you, just a few minutes, showing you some little tips and tricks that help us to get a better understanding of what's being said here. Now, First Peter's not a difficult book to understand. It's pretty straightforward. It's written in a very practical manner in order to give us practical advice of how to live as Christians. But there are some things in here that I want us to really look at and dig out of the passage that'll give us some context and give us some perspective on what Peter is trying to teach us here. Now, this Sunday morning, I'm going to be preaching from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. And these two verses are basically an exhortation on how to live our lives as Christians in front of non-believers. Now, in verse 11, Peter says something that's really interesting. He describes his listeners as sojourners and exiles. Some translations refer to them as foreigners or visitors, and there are a lot of different ways these things can be translated. But what I want us to do is I want us to look at these two things that the Apostle Peter calls us. Now, before we get there, I want to remind you that how we look at things and how we interpret what's around us really has a lot to do with our perspective. Many of you, like me, wear bifocals or trifocals. I wear bifocals, but I have the progressive lenses so you don't see the lines. And so in essence, they really are trifocals. Now, if you've ever worn these, you know that for about the first week of wearing them, it is absolute misery because your eyes are adjusting to the change from the top of the lens to the bottom of the lens. And it's the funniest thing because you can almost always find somebody who it's easy to spot somebody who's new to bifocals because they walk like they're in a marching band. They're high stepping, those feet are just going. And what they're doing is they're trying to find where the ground is, because as you look forward, and then in your peripheral vision, as you look down, the ground looks a whole lot different than it used to. It looks a whole lot closer, like you might need to be stepping up. If a bumblebee flies below you in that peripheral vision, sometimes it looks like a hog's run in front of you. And so it takes a while for your eyes to adjust. But during that period, the perspective that you have on what's around you is really changed because of what you're seeing. Life for the Christian can oftentimes be very difficult because we have the wrong perspective. Now, this is what Peter's telling us here in this passage. He says, brethren or beloved or loved ones, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh which wage war against your soul. Now, these two words, sojourners and exiles, are very important because what they do is they remind us of what we really are. For far too many Christians, we've become way too comfortable in this world. This world is everything to us. What happens to us in this world becomes absolutely the most important thing in the world. We become so attached to the things of this world. Even in our churches, the perspective of our churches becomes so worldly because we're so concerned about the things of this life that we fail to understand exactly how Christ has called us to live. In this passage, we're reminded that we're sojourners and exiles. In fact, these two words in the original Greek are really basically kind of mutations of the same root word, but both of them have an incredibly poignant meaning to us. What it's telling us is that it reminds us that we are not citizens of this world or citizens of this worldly way of living. What he's telling us is that we are a stranger in a foreign land. If you've ever traveled overseas, you understand the feeling of what it means to be a stranger in a foreign land. You may have the time of your life, but you never really can escape the fact that as great as this place is, you don't belong here. In fact, almost every person I know that is an American that has traveled overseas, when they get home and that plane lands on American soil, there's a sense of relief and just that I'm home that's pretty satisfying. For the Christian, what we need to do is we need to work so diligently while we're here. And we're certainly here in this world, and Jesus told us that we're in the world, but we're not of it. We need to understand that we really are sojourners or strangers in this world. This world is not our home, and we don't need to become so comfortable here that this world becomes too difficult to leave. It also says we're exiles. That means a stranger that settled in a place temporarily without making a permanent home. Dear friends, our time in this life ought to be temporary at best. We ought not to hold too tightly to anything in this life because we're looking for our home in a different world. We're waiting for our home in heaven. So we must live as citizens of heaven in the foreign land of this world. Thanks for stopping by.